So for some reason I can't attach my camera to the tripod, so I've had to make a ghetto setup. I always knew these books would come in handy one day.
Hey guys, my name is Anton here from Anton Nutrition, and today we're going to be going through our third nutritional priority, which is nutrient timing. Now, I'd like to start off by saying I'm sorry that this video is so late. It's been a couple of weeks. It's just been a really busy period of time for me. I've had things going on and I haven't really felt like sitting and recording in my room because it is a little bit awkward. Here it is, and hopefully these will become a bit more regular than they have been recently. So as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about nutrient timing. I'm going to split it into a strength and an endurance section just because they're two very different needs for two very different sports. However, for both of them, the timing of nutrients is very important. This is due to the postprandial response of our body after consuming different macronutrients, different quantities and in different combinations. And what that basically means is the effect it has on our body. Well-timed nutrition can prepare us for training, it can sustain our performance and reduce the risk of injury, and it can also improve recovery. Ultimately, this is what we want from our training. We want to be prepared for training and performance. We want to have a high level of performance during an event. We want to reduce the risk of injury. We also want to be able to recover well between training sessions and matches or events. Throughout this video, I'm going to be following a daily template which is similar to the way I live. I'm going to be using a template that I follow, and I'm going to be assuming most people train in the evening. However, if you train in the morning or midday, you can still follow these rules. You just have to adjust the template slightly for your needs. If you need any help with that, just contact me and I'll do the best I can. So we're going to start at breakfast because this is the first meal of the day, so why wouldn't you start there? There's evidence suggesting when we compare the consumption of a high protein breakfast, say 30 to 35 grams, with a high carbohydrate breakfast, a relationship exists with feelings of satiation at lunchtime. Now what this means is a high protein breakfast will make you feel fuller for longer, if you like, and it'll reduce the risk of you having another snack or meal in the mid-morning or early lunchtime time, and so compromising your macronutrient intake requirements and your overall caloric goals. And that's what we want. Those are our main priorities. The main importance of this high protein breakfast is to keep us on track throughout the day and to make sure we stick to our plan. Now after this meal, I'm going to kind of jump towards the later part of the day, which I was talking about around training. There are three important meals to consider around training. These are your pre-meal, the one you eat before, any intra-nutrition you have, so anything you eat or drink during your training, and your post-training, so anything that you eat after the training. For strength athletes, we want to prepare ourselves for training, but it's not as critically important because of the nature of what we're doing. For strength athletes, it's recommended we consume 1 to 4 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. Now this is quite a big range, so we have to be smart when deciding how much to have. There are 3 factors that will influence your decision as to how much carbohydrate and even protein you require pre-training. These include the duration of training, also how long you're going to be training for, the intensity of training, how difficult you perceive it's going to be, how difficult you know it will be, and thirdly, the volume of training, how much you're actually going to be doing. If these 3 factors are very high, then you know you're going to be wanting in that upward bracket of 3 to 3.5, maybe even 4 grams carbohydrates pre-training. However, if it's very low duration, volume and intensity, you might only need that 1 gram, and everywhere in between. This is something you have to experiment with yourself and understand your body. I myself know that if I'm going to something relatively high intensity, as long as the volume's low, I don't need too much carbohydrates. But even at a low intensity, if the volume is very high, I struggle and I do require a lot more carbohydrate. Now we can also use these 3 factors when deciding how much protein intake we require. Evidence suggests that the range is much smaller than 1 to 4 grams per kilogram of body weight, and it's in fact between 0.15 to 0.25 grams per kilogram of body weight. Now this is a lot less, and there's a much smaller range. I would suggest for strength athletes almost always hit that 0.25, and if not, go beyond it. Just as long as you factor this into your macronutrient requirements, just try and hit that upward barrier, but don't go too excessive either. Now let's move on to the intra-training meal. The purpose of this meal is to maintain performance throughout and to also reduce the risk of injury. This meal might not be essential in all circumstances. However, There is some evidence that consuming 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate during training can have a positive influence on performance, and maybe a little bit of protein as well. Then we come to the post-training meal, which is probably the most important meal of all. It has a really big influence on our recovery and also any responses to hypertrophy or strength gains. Evidence suggests our carbohydrate content should be much lower in this meal, around the 1 to 1.5 gram range. Reflect on your own training. If it was a high volume session that you found very difficult, if you feel fatigued, make sure you do hit that upper bracket of that 1.5 gram range. However, if it was relatively easy, then go for the 1 gram range. Use a bit of initiative or consult a nutritionist to give you some guidance on these points. I'd be happy to if you require me. Post-training protein intake is also very important for recovery. Evidence suggests a quarter to maybe half a gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. Now, these amounts of protein are much higher than during and pre-training guidelines, and this is because we require greater amounts of protein to repair any muscular damage and to fuel any growth. It should also be noted that it's recommended in this window to try and hit about 20 grams of essential amino acids. I'll go into more detail about this in future videos. And again, in this post-training window, we want to be keeping fats minimal. Now, when we further look at the pre and post-training meal, I suggest you break it down into 2 separate meals. I would recommend having your pre-training meals, if possible, one about 3 to 4 hours before training, and then one about 1 to 1.5 hours before training. If you drift too far away from training, you may not get the benefits, and too close to training, you haven't given yourself enough time for gastric emptying, and so that may have an influence on your performance. Now, for your post-training meal, again, split it into 2 meals. Aim to have your first one within half an hour. Certainly 1 hour is pushing it, but half an hour. And then another one about an hour and a half to 2 hours later. And I suggest these meals are very similar, follow the previous guidelines I mentioned. Now, with the rest of the meals throughout the day, you kind of just got to fill in the blanks. Having previously worked at your calorie requirements and your macronutrient requirements, and then taking away, for example, 30 grams protein for your breakfast, your carbs and your fats for your pre-training, your post-training, and during, if you're having one of those meals, you've got to fill in the blanks with what you're left. And this is where the majority of your fat content is going to come throughout the day.